All right, so we started. So, the big thing that I think that we should talk about is the Grizzlies trade. And what do you think of it?
What do I think? Yeah, I was just working. I saw it. I was like, it's hard to take in because Jonas has been a big part of the team the past 2 years. Being down low, he was game changing, and I thought was like one of the more underrated centers. I get it though. I don't think, personally, I thought the Grizzlies were trending towards like getting out of the rebuilding stage. I think this just shows that the front office wants a little more, and they aren't satisfied with what we already have. So I think I like it. It's aggressive. I think they're going to try to get more young talent instead of what I thought we'd probably get more like a seasoned vet to go into an already young lineup.
Yeah, and I can agree with that. The big thing that you're going to miss is you get that offensive availability from Jonas. There has been multiple times throughout the season where you saw the Grizzlies were struggling, and they were like, Josh struggling, or maybe even Josh and Jaren's not on the floor. Well, they know that we can throw the ball down to Jonas, and Jonas can go get a basket, or Jonas can make something happen. You don't get that with Steven Adams. I think Steven's going to be there for a while, just because I don't think you're going to be able to get rid of both contracts. I don't expect Eric Bledsoe to be there for a while, just because of it is $18 million, and it's really not $18 million now. It's like $4 million now. It's not 18. It starts $18 million like on the 30th of June next year. So I think that makes him more available. So I could see the Grizzlies cutting him and just saying, we're not going to deal with that. Or they could try to package him with some other stuff and try to move up, just like how we were talking about earlier today. I could really see if the Grizzlies, the first few picks in the draft are really going to determine if the Grizzlies try to move up during draft day. If they haven't made the move after the third or fourth pick, I don't expect them to move up. The big thing for me is where do you want to go in the draft? This is a very deep draft, and it's very talented, but it's a lot of guard-heavy talent. And I believe you've got your backcourt figured out. You can always add more to get better, but I don't expect you to go point guard. You're just not. You're gonna keep with Ja, and you're not gonna pick top 10 for a backup point guard. So I think you look to go either center if you stay, and you maybe go to Mobley from Kai Jones from Texas.
Kai, who's a power forward, listed as a power forward.
So yeah, but he's 6'11". That's one of those things to where he might play next to Jaren if you decide to stay at 10. If you decide you need to move up, maybe you look to go small forward. Maybe you try to reach for someone like Moses Moody or Keon Johnson, maybe get some shooting, and maybe you move Dylan down a spot and move Kyle to the bench. That would be my thing. But the next few days, I think, are going to be, like we talked about a few days ago, even before this trade happened, we talked about how this offseason is important. Remember, because we were talking about how Jaren needs to be extended, and you need to determine what you're going to do with your backup group when it comes to Tyus and Grayson Allen and that rotation. Now you've pretty much made it to where you're not focusing on extending Jaren, you're focusing on what are we going to do at 10.
I think what we should be focusing on is that the offseason isn't like finished now. There's going to be more moves, as we saw like last year, just like trade for a player, trade him again, just profit off a trade. And so looking at these guys, I'd be doubtful to even see Eric Bledsoe in a Grizzlies uniform. Steven Adams, he'll probably play. It's just he's a role player or whatever. We can rock with him. He's a vet.
I think he'd be great if you do go center in the draft. Maybe he starts at center, but once you feel comfortable with that, with that player you drafted, you move Steven to the bench, and he plays almost that Gorgie Jang role, and he gets kind of that same amount of money. The problem is that it is $17 million. That's a lot to pay for a backup center. So
you have to think about it for a second. Like, why did they throw in Steven Adams?
They did that to get rid of cap space.
There had to be a reason. Well, do you think maybe that's what the Grizzlies wanted?
I think that could be true.
Without a center, maybe that's why we wanted him.
Maybe I think Bledsoe was thrown in. I think it was going to be Steven.
I had been hearing stuff about Bledsoe days before connecting.
Maybe you go Steven because you don't trust. So I think Steven being thrown in was important because it does leave you with a center. Bledsoe, like I said, we think he's going to be with the team. But for the Pelicans side of it, it does add that cap space that they need because Lonzo Ball's a free agent. Josh Hart's a free agent. And I've heard that they want to go after Kyle Lowry, but they need that cap space to do it. And they've pretty much just dumped Steven's $17 million, picked up Jonas's $14, and then it's supposed Eric Bledsoe's getting paid $18 million.
Jonas is head and shoulders better than Steven Adams.
Oh yeah, I'm not arguing with that. The only thing that Steven's just probably a step down rebounding wise, but I think the other thing is you get that defensive versatility. Mm-hmm. It's the offensive game that's going to be the problem for you, but you don't really need that from Steven Adams. Now you're thinking that you got a full healthy offseason from Jaren, and Ja's going to keep developing. You saw in the playoffs what Dylan Brooks can do, so you really feel like the big key is if Jaren can show that offensive prowess that he showed the first 2 years, year and a half that he was in the league, where he was able. He's never going to be that post-up guy. I don't think he's going to put on the muscle mass for that. But that pick and pop kind of guy with Ja, or just the space the floor four that can shoot the ball extremely well, that's going to be huge because it allows the floor to open up, not only for Ja to drive, but I think it allows for more offensive rebounds from Steven Adams, which he's a great rebounder. I think he's a better offensive rebounder than he is a defensive rebounder, just because he's got that hustle and that I'm going to get to the ball first kind of mentality. And I think the big thing was if Dylan didn't play like Dylan in the playoffs, maybe you don't look at this trade. Maybe you look somewhere else, but I think that Dylan showed you that he can be that guy behind Ja, or maybe even behind Ja and Jaren. It allows you to say we need better defense from our center, not as much offense. I think that was the big problem towards the end of that.
That's interesting because I think the other way. I think our center, we struggled with Rudy Gobert locking up Jonas. It was bad when we could not get Jonas going, and we struggled a lot. And obviously the Jazz were the better team, but after winning Game 1, and then Rudy would just cover Jonas, and it was just clamps, and we couldn't get anything going. And I think the center position is so important when you have a point guard who doesn't shoot a lot of threes like Ja does. He's not a shooter. He's a pick and roll kind of guy. And the best I've seen Ja play comes when the pick and roll is just smooth and it's just working well. I remember seeing games. I remember a Wizards game. He dropped his first triple-double. Him and Jonas were just going at it, pick and roll, like 3 straight possessions. Couldn't be stopped.
Do you think that's going to be more centered towards a pick and roll with Jaren, and then Stevens kind of on that short corner, maybe a little bit inside, like maybe 2 or 3 steps inside the 3-point line, and he's pretty much not rolling, Jaren's popping, and if the big slides, like Rudy Gobert slides from Steven, that's an alley-oop to Steven, because I think that was one of the big things with Steven was he did a lot of pick and rolls with Russell Westbrook, and that was when they were both in Oklahoma City, and he fed off that really well because so much attention goes to Russell Westbrook.
Yeah.
Maybe the Grizzlies start tweaking it to where Jaren does it and they pick and pop. And you go to Jaren, or you let – he's almost playing – remember years ago when Mike and Mark used to run those pick and rolls, and Mark would pop, but Tony Allen would cut short corner, and Mike could dish it to Tony. I think that would be kind of the same thing. You see Steven cut off ball on those pick and pops because you have to worry about Josh driving. You have to worry about Jaren shooting. And if you can kind of get that big – because you think Steven's shooting ability, you're not going to be out there on the 3-point line guarding him. Mm-hmm. But if – the center, whether it be, Gobert, Embiid, whoever you're playing, stands in right outside the paint and says, I'm going to slide, and he's been told, I'm going to slide on that pick and pop because they're either going to switch it or they're going to stay, but I've got to stop Ja from getting to the front of the rim because that's obviously the most important part of the Grizzlies' offense is Ja Morant. If he slides, maybe Steven cuts behind him and Ja throws that because I think that's one of the big things that Brandon Clark really benefits from is his ability to, that uber athletic ability to get above the rim because Ja is such a good passer. I think it would work really well with Steven Adams too.
I mean, I've been seeing it. I didn't see it as much this past season, but Ja's rookie season, he did it with Jaren, he did it with Jonas, and he did it with Brandon Clark. Mm-hmm. They all rocked in. That was when I saw I don't know what I thought from Ja this year. I thought he was, I don't want to say better his rookie season.
I think he was more explosive his rookie season.
Rookie season, I think he had less to do, but he made more opportunities with what he was given. But the second year, he obviously got a lot more playing time. He was definitely relied on a lot more, and I think we expected a lot more from him. So I think, in terms of like the pick and roll offense, I think Steven Adams is great at it. But I don't think that's like we can do that with anyone already on our roster, because Jaren obviously with a massive wingspan and Brandon Clark who's a high flyer, I think anyone can do it.
I think, and they've said that before. I've I've seen people talk about how good of a screener Steven Adams is.
Oh yeah,
and I think that's going to work really well. I just think it takes away from, once again, that, and I think that's what they're going to probably lean on. Kind of the same thing with Jonas, but they're not going to throw the ball down to Jonas and let him play post basketball. I don't think that's going to happen very much anymore. So maybe it leads to a bigger role from Dylan. I think the other thing it does here is it forces you to look at that bench situation, because now you go from, if your starters are going to be Ja, Dylan, Kyle, Jaren, and Steven, your bench group's going to be some combination of Tyus, Desmond, Grayson, Tillman, Bledsoe, Clark, and you're thinking to yourself, well, you don't need 6 guys, and plus you're whoever you pick at 10. So you're thinking to yourself, you've got to cut that down, maybe 3 or 4. I could see you doing a 10-man rotation during the season because it is such a long season, but I think you look more towards the 8-man or the 9-man rotation, sometimes even 7, depending on who you have, when it comes closer to playoff time. So it really makes you evaluate what you're going to do with your bench unit. And on top of that, plus you've got pick 40 from, it's either 40 or 51 from New Orleans. I don't remember which one it is. But that's a second-year player. Like, that's a second-round pick. I'm not saying that's going to be a starter, but, those one of those things to where you pick him. You can't just pick him and cut him. You have to keep him on your team. So that's even another guy you kind of have to look at. So I wouldn't – my thing is I expect the Grizzlies to make another move before the season starts.
100%.
That's a definite. My question is, where do you go? Like, let's say we don't trade in the draft. We pick at 10, whoever we pick at 40, whoever we pick. What do you envision the Grizzlies doing with those? Because you think that Ja, Jaren, we'll say Steven, Dylan, and Kyle are all untouchable. You've got 7 bench players with your number 10 pick, Tyus, Bledsoe, Grayson, Desmond Bane, Brandon Clark, and Tillman. What would you envision happening to that?
So I think because you said Kyle's untouchable, but I think if I'm the front office, this isn't what they're gonna do. You have Desmond, Kyle, and Brandon Clark. One's got to go.
I would agree with that.
That's what I think, and I think Desmond showed promise, and obviously we needed a shooter. He gives you that, and I even saw promise like on the off-ball dribbling and making his own plays. We don't have many shooters besides Dylan who can do that. Grayson's a great shooter.
Grayson's streaky though.
I don't know if he can ever. He is streaky,
and he's injured a lot.
But he was better more times than he was bad, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think they're gonna get rid of any of them. I'm just saying, if I was the front office, I would say, Kyle has trade value and he's getting paid a lot. I'd say move him on. I think
he's also on an expiring contract. I think that adds more value to it, especially
for a bit longer.
Especially to somebody that I wouldn't even say. I don't think the Lakers would have someone but someone like the Clippers, the Lakers, that are constantly. We need like 1-year players that we can make playoff pushes on. Someone like Miami, that would be a good trade place for Kyle, just because I'm not saying scheme-wise, but just like when it comes to the idea of we like to play this 1 year, we don't rebuild, we retool kind of mindset. I could see that with Kyle. I would push more for, instead of grouping Kyle, Desmond, and Brandon Clark together, and one would got to go, I would say you could probably throw in, you don't think Kyle's going to go, I would say realistically you could probably aim that more to Brandon Desmond and Grayson Allen. And I think Grayson Allen would be the one to go just because he is a shooter and there's no such thing as too much shooting in the NBA. But at the same time, he's a lot less expensive than Kyle is, and he's coming on the end of that rookie deal. So he's expiring at the end of this year unless someone extends him. And it's not as much. I think it's like $3 or $4 million compared to Kyle's $9 million. But it allows you to move Desmond Bane to that 2 position, and then you determine what you want to do with that 3. Because like we said, we don't think Bledsoe is going to be on the team. I think that's a foregone conclusion. I think that he's gone, but you've really got to look at who goes. Because you figured it out. Starters are fine unless you move Kyle. It really depends on what you do on that bench unit, especially for this year.
And here's the thing about the trade. I think you have to trade. The reason I say trade Kyle is because he has so much more value than say like Desmond Bane, Brandon, or Grayson. And if I weren't to trade Kyle, I would trade Brandon because he was a first-team All-Rookie. He's a young athlete. People know about him.
Even though he had a down year last year?
I think even though he fell out of the rotation a little last year, I still think he has that ability.
I think that was just Taylor playing hot hand kind of situation too with Brandon.
Yeah,
I think because he was struggling, I think Taylor said we're kind of making that playoff push so that we can get that experience. And you're really not playing good basketball right now. Or you're not playing well. You're not the top 10, one of the best 10 players on the team.
I don't even think it's how he was playing. I didn't even think he really played that poorly. It's just our offense was evolving into a system that didn't require his skill set, and that's perfectly okay because we needed shooting badly, and obviously Grayson Allen showed up great for us at times, like you said.
And I think the one that really pushed him out of the rotation was Bane. His shooting,
Bane's efficiency was.
Yeah, that was the big thing. I think Bane's
great.
shooting efficiency really forced Brandon out of the rotation. I think you're right when it comes to it's almost a Kyle, Brandon, or Bane thing because you're gonna get it's which one would you rather have? Do you want Bane shooting? Do you want Clark's athleticism, or do you want Kyle's IQ? And it's really I think Kyle's IQ is the most valuable, but there's still so much left to do this offseason. And, we could be talking about this 2 weeks from now. We're going to be talking about 3 or 4 brand new players. My question to you is, because we don't have a lot of time left, let's say the Grizzlies stay at 10. Not what player, because that's difficult to predict. What build or what position would you be looking for at 10 if you were the Grizzlies?
Obviously, like a big man. I don't know the centers in this draft unless we make an extremely aggressive move in, like, say, Mobley, which I don't think is going to happen. And
you'd have to go in top 3 to get that.
Kai Jones isn't bigger than Jaren. Honestly, you could even see Jaren move to center. That's like crazy. It's just an idea. We need a replacement, and I think we could honestly get away with Xavier Tillman. And
how tall is Tillman? Is he
the back?
I don't think Tillman's that much bigger, is he?
Than who, Jaren?
Yeah, I don't think he's humongous. This is one of those things for me. I would agree with you at 10. You look to go get.
You look for a big, but like we said, I don't think they're done trading yet. And at number 10 is no spot to be picking a big man.
No, Tillman's 6'8", so you're taking Tillman at 6'8". That's, I don't know. That would be interesting to see. Oh, look, ESPN put the trade through. So now it says Steven Adams is on our roster. That's great to see. I even forgot D'Anthony Melton. That's another guy to the rotation.
I like D-Mel. I mean, obviously we have him on contract. He's a do-it-all.
I think he's paid a little
He's here
too
to
much.
stay. He does get paid a lot, but he didn't regress. In my opinion,
that would be a him or Tyus kind of thing. Because like you said, we expect Bledsoe to be gone.
Last year, Tyus was disappointing. I thought Melt played, if not just as well, if not better.
Except Melton's shooting can be just. He takes some.
I don't know, dude.
Especially,
he had
I was
games where
watching. Yeah, he did.
miss.
But I was watching the playoffs. I don't remember which game it was. It might have been 3 or 4. And I was watching Melton shoot, and he was like started off like 0 for 5, and I was like, these aren't even good shots. These are just terrible shots.
We can only take those playoffs with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
It's such a young team, like in their first playoffs, like the second youngest NBA team, the youngest in the playoffs. I won't hold much against them, but you were saying earlier, like with the Kyle, Brandon, and Bane situation, instead of Kyle's IQ, like in terms of experience, he's like he's got it. After Jonas is gone, like he's
it's
that
him
guy.
And Dylan Brooks.
It was so Dylan Brooks. That was his first playoffs.
The fact that Dylan Brooks is the most tenured player on the Grizzlies is insane to me.
Yeah,
I still remember when we drafted him, like
and
out of nowhere.
Personally, I like it. This is like,
I'll be honest. I like having this conversation on, man, what in the world are we going to do to fix this roster? I like having the conversation of who can we package together to get better. We already have too many.
This is what the fans like. They like a front office who's aggressive. Mm-hmm. People don't like sitting in the offseason not
until you make the Justice Winslow trade. Jesus, I thought that was a good trade when that happened, and I was so wrong. But so we kind of agree at 10 we would look to go maybe big man. That's a little high to pick big man. Let's say we were able, because we were talking about this before we started recording. We give 10, we give Bledsoe, and maybe we do one of the future first that we have, whether it's ours, LA's, or Utah's, and we move up. Let's say we get inside the top 7.
There is Jonathan Kuminga, power forward, who I've heard a lot of, and he's like notably after Mobley, like arguably they're 1 and 2 at the big man position.
So would you say try to go him?
I would just say there's no point in taking a point guard or even much of a shooting guard.
Would you
up there? So there's really nowhere else to look.
But see, that would, because my argument I was talking about to you earlier was, what if we went high? Like, let's say we got top 6 and we went after a 2 or a 3 guard. What if that forced Dylan down to 3 and it forced Kyle to the bench to give you that? Because one of the big things with Kyle is he's got really good ball handling skills, and like he can run the offense when Ja's not on the floor. So maybe that puts him almost at that kind of that point guard position for your bench group, and it allows you to throw Tyus, into a trade package. That would be an interesting thing to see. I think when you get that high in the draft, when you get top 7-ish range, top 6, if you don't have an all-star or what you think is a cornerstone of your rebuild or your team, you just take best player available. So, like, obviously you don't go point guard because you've got Ja. So there's no reason to go pick a 6-foot point guard from somewhere. I don't know. You would say you probably don't go small forward to power forward kind of range because you think that's kind of where Jaren floats.
We have too much of that already.
And you already have too much of that. But if one of the prospects that I've been talking about that I like, and part of it's because I'm a Razorback fan, but that's fine. I like Moses Moody. I think he's still kind of young. He's only like 19, but he plays really good defense. He can score from all 3 levels. He kind of reminds me a little bit of like the same kind of role you could envision Dylan in. But it's difficult to say. I do have this question because I just did think of this. No matter where you draft, whether it's top 7, 10, maybe you trade down and you go somewhere else, would you want an 18-year-old or would you want one of the older players with this Grizzly? Like maybe a junior or a sophomore or junior, senior, like a 20-something-year-old with this Grizzlies roster?
Easily older. And it's not because they're already young. I just feel, just in the draft in general, I feel like a lot of more NBA players who are more established and haven't played longer are just better. It's hard to say. You've seen, like, obviously Luka Doncic the past year, who's great, and no one really compares Denny Advia, who the Wizards picked up. Obviously, he has promise. I wouldn't take. There's a center from Turkey. Not gonna pronounce his name. I think he's also has a possibility of being on our team, but he's much later. He's not top 10. So I agree with you when you say, like, take the best available. I always feel like you can't go wrong taking the best available unless you're, like, wasting your time. Because I don't think if you're top 5, you definitely have someone in mind. If you're 10, then take best available.
Because, I mean, like you never know who can fall. But I agree with you when it comes to maybe drafting somewhere towards the older end of the draft spectrum when it comes to 20-something-year-olds, because you feel like they're a little more developed already. You don't have to spend a year or two kind of, let's wait and see. Let's hope they develop. And you kind of want someone within that age group of Ja and Jaren, because you know that Dylan's still young, but Dylan, if you say, we're going to be a contender in 3 years, well, that puts Dylan towards the upper sides of 20-something, maybe even 30. I don't think he's 27. I think he's like 24. But you don't want to go draft an 18-year-old to where your starting rotation is like Dylan, 3 years from now you have a 21-year-old who's just now figuring it out, and Dylan who might be like towards the back half of his prime kind of thing. So you want to kind of keep that age group kind of together. But
Gotcha.
I think, like we talked about, at 10, you can't really tell what's going to happen in front of you. And one of the examples that I give was a few years ago, people were like expecting Bobby Portis to go like 14, and he dropped to like 20. So you can't really tell, but you have it in your mind what you kind of want to go after. And one of the big things, like, I'll use when we talk, I'm going to switch to football now. When we talked about the Colts a few years ago when they drafted Jonathan Taylor, they were looking at him. They wanted to go running back at that time. They thought maybe we could go after running back, and he just was not getting picked up. And they're like, all right, then we trade up. So I think that's what you could see the Grizzlies do. They kind of sit there, and they're sitting there at 10, and they're like, oh, we really like this player, and maybe that's a reach for us because he will get drafted by then, but he keeps falling and falling and falling for some reason, and then you could see the Grizzlies trade up draft night. I think it's interesting to see, if we have this conversation on Monday next week about it. Obviously, the draft would come and gone, so I think it would really answer what the Grizzlies are kind of doing. If they pick straight up, I think it's really going to tell you, like, they don't trade and they just pick 10 and they pick 40. I think it's really going to set the tone for who's on the chopping block to get traded or get cut or whatever you want to call it at this point.
The reason I like the older guy, like an older player, which isn't old at all, but definitely not like first year college guy. I think these past years the Grizzlies have drafted straight for talent, like raw talent from Ja.
I would agree with that.
Raw talent. It's perfectly okay to just draft like a college star who just was a great ball player. We don't need like someone who can jump 45 inches.
Is Luke Garza available?
Yeah, Luke Garza. I mean, maybe in the second
I don't
round.
even know where he's projected to go, but like, let's just envision that drops to 40. I think that would be the perfect pick at 40 right there for you.
Exactly. I mean, I think, and you know what?
Just a big guy that he would be the Jonas.
Now that I'm thinking, you know what this trade tells me? I think it tells me that the Grizzlies organization thought their young players would be more progressed by now, and then they realized they weren't, and decided, hey, we need to make more moves in the draft.
I could see where that could make sense. I would argue that it's more along the lines of you're that one piece away kind of thing, and you don't think you're going to get it at 17.
Well, I don't think you're getting. You can take.
I think it brought up the obvious issue that you don't. Because remember when we first drafted Jaren, the idea was that he was going to slide to center eventually, especially when Jonas' contract came up. I think this trade shows you that you might be looking elsewhere to have a center, whether it's in the draft or in future drafts. but I think it's one of those things where you don't believe that you're that competitor yet, like you said. So you're building as many assets as you can, especially with the draft picks. That way, when you hit on one, like let's say you hit on 10 and you get someone like, really good, whatever it is, but you see them this year and you're like, oh, this is the guy, right? This is that third piece or that fourth piece we're going to have next to Ja, Dylan, and Jaren. Then you throw in all those extra first-round picks you had, maybe a few bench players to go get you that all-star that's disgruntled and ready to get out. Because I think they're in a really interesting position because they're still really young and they can still build, but you don't want to build depth at this point. You want to build talent. Yeah. You've got the depth. You want to see that talent, and you don't want to get caught into a position where you're just constantly drafting these average players, not these average players, but these 17th pick, kind of hover around the 8th seed every year. Yeah. So you had to. I think that's why you made the trade, because you had to strike. Because you're thinking, this is the. I mean, yes, we can get better. This team right here can get better, but realistically, do you envision that roster being a top 4 seed in the West? No. You need another player, and the free agency market was not going to be it this year. So you're like, let's go find something in the draft. Well, you don't think you're going to find it at 17 unless you find just a diamond in the rough, which that doesn't happen every year. It's a reason why it's called diamond in the rough. So you're thinking, who is the most valuable piece that we're not willing? Who's the most valuable tradable piece we have? You think Ja's untouchable, you think Jaren's untouchable, you think Dylan's untouchable. Well, the next person
Kyle is the most valuable.
Well, before the Jonas trade, you're thinking it's Jonas and Kyle. Okay. So you go Jonas first because, I don't know. I didn't understand that. I don't even understand why New Orleans took it. I think if you had to grade the trade right now, I think we won. Maybe that's different in 6 months, especially if you don't get rid of Bledsoe and you have to eat that humongous contract. But I think right now it's a great trade. It'll be interesting to see. We'll talk about it more next week, especially after the draft, because I think it's going to be very interesting, especially for us. And I think it's going to be interesting for a few teams at the top, especially after, because Cade Cunningham's going 1 to Detroit. But after that, I think it's going to get really interesting. And I think the first few picks, like I said, is going to determine what the Grizzlies do. But we said this a few weeks ago, this is an interesting offseason for the Grizzlies, and I think this trade just made it a whole lot more interesting. And it brings news to Memphis, which there's no such thing as bad publicity, right?
Right.
We'll talk about it again next week on Monday. Stay tuned for Wednesday. We'll talk what? Baseball? Or do you want to do standings?
Standings.
We'll do our preview for NFL standings and who we think is going to be right and who we think is going to be wrong. Hint, we're going to argue about the AFC South. Stay tuned. Until then, this is Jared DiGaetano and
Carter Daly.
And we'll make up a name for the podcast at some point later. Have a good one, guys.